work better. In terms of mental health, I think we use this term interchangeably when we mean different things. I think there is a big difference between mental illness and mental health. We all have mental health. Mental illness for me means much more severe, more pathological type struggles and disorders. So someone with schizophrenia, for example, it's very, for me, that doesn't fit into the same sort of bracket as someone who's got maybe social anxiety.
Sure.
I think there's some neurological factors, and then sometimes there are traumas that happen that then impact our sense of self and our confidence, and we then struggle with. So mental health, for me, under the bracket, it's when our nervous system is under stress. And there's two different ways it goes. It either goes hyper-arousal, which is when we become overwhelmed, we become panicky. This would, anxiety would fall under more like OCD type things as well. Or there's hypo-arousal, so hypo, and this is kind of systems shut down. This is like depression, shame, disassociation. So when it comes to mental health, I think it's our normal stress response, and it's normal in the sense of, if we reference what I said earlier about saber-toothed tigers, what we'd want is our nervous system to fire up if there was a saber-toothed tiger. Now we don't have saber-toothed tigers, but we have the morning commute. We have socializing with different people. We have coming online doing a podcast. Like these things that our nervous system doesn't know, is this safe or is this not? Sometimes things that are new, we get nervous about as well. And so I think it's the stress of our nervous system that I would put under mental health. So things like anxiety, depression, OCD type behaviours, repetitive negative thought patterns. Think things in terms of when people can't express their truth, we find ways of acting it out as well. So an OCD, for example, where someone repetitively does something, it's underlying bit. Whilst we see the symptom as maybe perpetual hand washing, which is really tricky in a pandemic, by the way, because everybody who's got an OCD
is correct.
may have a thing of, well, I've been right all along. Like there is reason for me to wash my hands the whole time. So I think that's tricky to balance out. But that there's many different, many. I mean, gosh, I don't know how many there are, and I'm in the industry of how many kind of different labels there are. But I think we have to be really careful with the language we use, because quite often people say, I'm really depressed. Mm-hmm. And actually, you're not depressed. You're just stressed out today. Or I feel really anxious. Actually, feeling anxious about something is normal. It's completely normal. But if we pathologize this and we kind of then label ourselves with it, it then becomes our identity rather than a struggle. And I think that's where it's becoming, on one hand, we're kind of trying to break the stigma, and on the other hand, it can become, not for everybody, I really want to stress not for everybody, but for some, it can become a kind of a trump card to pull.
Sure. And
an excuse or a crutch to lean on, that in order to avoid dealing with something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and so from first question, which is what kind of falls under mental health, and in terms of why it's coming up now, I think we've always had it. So if we go again, saber-tooth tiger brain, mental health existed when we were in caves and running around. We just didn't have the language for it. And I think from a generational perspective, we have maybe like our grandparents and our great-grandparents, they went through collective trauma in the war. Especially in England, there is this kind of stiff upper lip, keep calm and carry on. We don't have time for these sorts of conversations. Survival was just, it's not about emotion, it's just about shut down and carry on.
Yeah. And
then you have, so that generation wouldn't have had the support or even these types of conversations necessarily. It just wasn't around. Then you have their generation below, so their kind of sons and daughters, that then were brought up by essentially traumatized people in many cases, and then they were brought up to not really necessarily talk about emotions and, you know, knuckle down and all these kind of things. And then there's another generation, and then there's kind of us. And I think it's becoming much more of a conversation because our culture is changing, and we've gone from a kind of stiff upper lip, maybe quite prudish or a way of behaving. Now everything's kind of online as well. So there's much more of a viral sense of people talking about things. So I think it's slowly becoming more acceptable, and the more people talk about it, the bigger the conversation becomes. I do think the royals had a big part to play. The fact that William and Harry, when they did the Heads Together campaign, I think that's the more kind of public figures, celebrities, royals normalise it, people then feel okay to talk about it. But yeah, not to go into the big theory, but I think there's a big generational impact upon each other that's potentially changing for the better.